All right, well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to this CoachNet webinar on First Steps for Planting a Missional Church. We appreciate you taking an hour of your time to join us for this webinar. My name is John Van Bruggen, and I'm your host for today's event. Today's event will focus on the fifth step of planting a missional church, that of designing services and ministries that carry out God's mission. Before we get started, I'd like to point out the chat feature on the right side of your screen. If at any time during the webinar you have a question or a comment for our presenter, please send it to me as your host using the chat tool. That way your question or comment won't get lost in the shuffle. I also want to mention that today's webinar is being recorded, and so if at any time in the future you'd like to view this webinar again, share it with your team or a friend or a partner in ministry, you can do so by going to the CoachNet webinar page at www.coachnet.org/en for English/webcast. And you'll find all the links to our most recent webinars there. Now, finally, I'd like to take a quick survey just to find out a little bit about who you are, and you'll see this survey pop up in just a few seconds as we introduce Gary here. Well, our presenter today is Gary Rohrmeyer. Gary is the National Director of Converge USA, and he brings with him years of experience as a church planter, a church planting coach, a pastor, and denominational leader. He has developed such resources as Life's Biggest Journey, church planting landmines, and next steps for leading a missional church. And Gary is proud to call Chicagoland his home. And now, without further ado, here is our presenter, Gary Rohrmeyer.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Glad that you joined us. I'm staring out my window here and looking at all the snow that's built up in the Chicago area, and actually we're supposed to have a warm spell up to I think 36 degrees today, so I'm looking forward to that. Well, we're going to dig in here today, and sorry again for the little technical difficulties there, but we're going to dig in as we continue going through the various stages of planting a missional church. As we said earlier, the goal of First Steps is real simple. It's our desire to help you discover the church that God's planted in your heart and help that become a reality. I'm not here to promote a certain style or a model, because we believe it's going to take all types of churches to reach all kinds of people around our cities and throughout our world. Just to kind of give you an overview again of the First Steps process, you'll see here that there are basically three what I call theological foundations for planting a church. One, the glory of God; two, the mission of God; and three, the kingdom of God, and we dealt with that in our introduction. And then there are various stages. The first stage is relating with God and others. That's really dealing with the spiritual foundation of the planter and those initial partnerships that they form. And then we get into the networking and gathering phase, and how to enter a community with a missional spirit and a missional heart, and then how to begin gathering people to the mission, and empowering them and encouraging them to be part of what God's doing. And then a third stage is building a launch team. We really believe that we want to see churches start with good public services and to launch out. We see that in the book of Acts, how the church was launched. And so one of the critical pieces is really building a solid launch team. And then today we're going to talk about just designing your services and your initial public worship services and your initial strategies for planting a church. And then our next time together we'll talk about how to launch those services and how to reach out to the public. And then the final stage in the First Steps process is establishing your initial community and those initial ministries to take it forward. and then we move on into the whole process of how to lead your church in a missional way. Well, let's dig into stage 4. Stage 4, we're going to take a look at your worship style. We're going to look at the eight elements in a worship service, and then we're going to look at this missional principle called response filter, and first impressions, and then we're going to take just a few insights on children's ministries. So let's talk about the 8 elements of a public worship service. And I like taking planters through this passage in 2 Chronicles. Really, it's we're the first, kind of public worship service in a permanent facility, and we see this in the celebration and the dedication of the temple. And out of this, we'll find these eight principles, and the first one is in 2 Chronicles 5:11, and we just see here it says the priest withdrew from the holy place, and all the priests who were there had consecrated themselves regardless of their divisions. And this whole idea that we need, in our worship services, our leaders need to be spiritually prepared. And I love this word. I love the word, the imagery of consecration, and I look at that as really kind of a, in a sense, in a contemporary sense, I see this term as consecration as doing a rigorous spiritual inventory. And if we're going to have worship services that are going to impact people, impact believers, and impact people who are far from God, we need to make sure that everyone on our team is spiritually prepared to lead. And from the drummer to the sound tech to the ushers to those who work in setup to those who work with the children, they need to be spiritually prepared. And I think pastors and leaders of those various teams need to make sure and work with their people to make sure that they're spiritually prepared to lead God's people in worship and to put on those services in a powerful way. The second thing we see in this passage as we move through it, that there was a real celebrative atmosphere. There's a real celebrative atmosphere. I mean, you look at this and you see all the instruments. They had, cymbals, harps, lyres. They had 120 priests sounding trumpets, and people were singing in unison, and they were giving thanks to the Lord. And there just was a celebrative atmosphere. And so, at some point in our services, there needs to be just this tone of what I would say celebration and of giving thanks and praise to God for who He is. The third element is there was a clear focus on God. It's interesting throughout these 3 chapters that there's this phrase in 2 Chronicles 5:13 and 7:3 and 7:6 where the people were declaring, to God, they were saying to God, He is good and His love endures forever. And they said that 3 times in 3 different ways throughout this service. And so we need to look at when we're planning our services to make sure there's a clear focus of God's character, and so that we remember that God is the audience, and we want to lift God up before people in a powerful way. One of the things that we like to say is we want to help people get emotionally prepared in our services for the sole purpose of meeting God, who is the only one that can meet the deepest needs of their hearts. The fourth element is a place for public prayer. We see here in 2 Chronicles 6, the majority of 2 Chronicles 6 is Solomon's prayer of dedication. It's his prayer of dedication to the temple. And one of the things that I've been doing lately in my own devotional life, my own prayer life, is praying the prayers of Scripture. They're just powerful, and they're theologically rich and deep. And one little pet peeve I have today in our contemporary worship services is just we've kind of lost the kind of transcendent aspect of public prayer, and I think we need to bring it back. Spurgeon wrote this when he was teaching young men about praying in the service. He said these words: "Let me therefore very earnestly caution you, beloved brethren, against spoiling your services with your prayers. Make it your solemn resolve that all engagements of the sanctuary shall be of the best kind." And I think sometimes in our culture, in our contemporary church, and in a lot of new churches, where public prayer is kind of pushed off to the side, and it's not really given the place that it should. And a lot of times we don't prepare ourselves to lead the worship through our public prayers. So there needs to be a place for that. And then there was number 5. There was clearly a God moment. There was clearly a God moment. I love this verse, chapter 7, verses 1 to 2. When Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And the priests could not enter the temple because the glory of the Lord filled it. You know, people encountered God in this celebration, and God touched human hearts in many different ways. And ultimately, we want people to have an encounter with the living God through our services. And those encounters come in many different ways. People are touched in many different ways. It could be through a song. It could be through a kind word of another participant. It could be through the prayer. It could be through a silent moment. Maybe even a gentle touch. It could be through Scripture. It could be through the message that was spoken that day. I'm just amazed at how many times throughout our services when we ask people about, having God moments, and when they share how God had impacted their life through our public services, I'm amazed at how many different ways God uses to touch people. Common when as a pastor, one of the things that we practiced commonly was the whole idea of making sure we'd ask our staff, on Monday morning, what was your God moment? And, if your staff isn't having God moments, then you better be doing something about your services and taking a fresh look at those. Well, number 6, we see throughout this passage there was a reflective spirit. There was a reflective spirit. It's interesting, when God showed up in a mighty and powerful way in the service, it says here in chapter 7, verse 3, when all the Israelites saw the fire coming down and the glory of the Lord above the temple, they knelt on the pavement with their faces to the ground, and they worshiped and gave thanks to the Lord, saying, "He is good, his love endures forever." The people of God went from shouting and praising and singing to bowing, kneeling, and humbling themselves before God. There needs to be a moment where people can humble themselves and be quiet before God, and throw themselves on God's mercy. I find it so interesting that just a few minutes before, these people were shouting and cymbals were clashing and guitars were playing, and then all of a sudden God shows up, and then their faces are in the dirt on the pavement, mumbling the same thing they were shouting just a few minutes ago. God is good. His mercy, his love endures forever. And then number 7, there was a time of response. We see in verses 4 to 7 that the people of God responded, and through giving offerings. And if you're you need to plan a time of response in your services, a time for people to reflect. We live in such a hurried culture and society, and this is one of the things I think church planners and as they're designing new service, building new services and designing their worship service, is that they need to plan in this time of reflection and a time of response to where people can respond back to God, and respond back to God in maybe in commitment or in surrender or in giving, and we need to plan those times. And then finally, number 8, there was a clear impact on lives, and I love this. Chapter 7, verse 10, he says, on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people to their homes, joyful and glad in heart for the good things the Lord had done through David and Solomon and for his people Israel. And so we see that there was a definite impact, and people left experiencing God and being touched by the power of God's Word. I think we're going to do a little survey here, and let you guys fill that out. Here's a few just practical insights. Just to give you just the practical insights on planning your services. 1, always start with God first. Remember, God's the audience. The audience isn't the people you're ministering to, but they're the choir, and God's the audience. And number 2, be understandable to your guests. I think our worship services exist for God, but we also need to be understandable for those people who come into our services. And there's lots of ways of doing that. Explain to people sometimes why we clap our hands, if clapping is part of what you do. Explain to people the different elements of the service. One of the things our new churches do is we make sure we have Bibles set out, throughout wherever rented facility we're in, and we just tell people the page number. Just seeking, to be understandable, I think is it really reflects the missional heart of God. The third kind of just practical insight, just remember your public services, that they're open to the public, and try to stay away from the insider language, and just remember that it's a public service, so anybody can drop in, and so we just need to be ready for them. And then plan at least 3 months ahead. You should have a general idea of the theme of your service, and just minimally, you need to be planning ahead at least 3 months. Our next webinar, we're going to talk about preaching, and we're going to go pretty in depth in that. And I talked to pastors there about at least planning a year out on their preaching calendar. But I really encourage pastors and worship teams to really have a 3-month plan of where they're heading in their services. Watch the flow of your service carefully. Like what Rick Warren says, the flow of your service can really make the difference between a good service and a bad service. Give people time to respond. Build in a time of response into your service. If your time of response is at the end of the service, make sure you save that time. Make sure people are not rushed, and give them that, what the psalmist called the Selah moment, in the sense that's kind of that holy pause of just being quiet and absorbing what God has done in their life. And then end your service well. One of the pet peeves I have is when a worship leader gets up and tells people they're dismissed. And I think when you dismiss people, you end up sometimes being dismissive. And you get dismissed out of classes. When you leave a worship service, I think you need to send people out with a blessing, maybe a benediction, or even sometimes you need to send them out with a missional charge, a call to action. And then finally, you know, as you're developing your services, be patient. Be patient. And really try to find that what I call that sweet spot of having a service that lifts up God, it glorifies God, honors God, but also reflects the missional heart of God to the community. And it's going to take time. You know, one pastor said, you know, he said, you know what, he figured it was going to take him 5 years from to figure out how to develop a service that was going to be glorifying to God, but also going to impact his community. So just be patient with your team and with yourself in developing that. Well, let's move on to a missional principle I got from David Garrison out of his book, a little book called Church Planting Movements. And this is it's called the response filter principle. Response filtering is employing methods for registering responses to mass evangelism efforts for the purpose of follow-up, discipleship, and church planting. And just real quickly, here's just want maybe a survey question here. What type of response filter does your church use? Is it communication cards? That seems to be a very commonplace. Or a tear-off? Or is it a guest registry? Is it attendance sheets that you pass through the rows? Or is it nothing formal, just relational? What would be some of the, you know, as you think through, what are some of the common ones there? One of the keys is there are what I call communication cards, and there are several questions you need to answer. You know, like 1, who are they? 2, what visit was it? How'd they get there? You know, how'd they hear about the church? One of the things we're adding to our communication cards, or a lot of our churches are doing, is they're adding another section under how they get there. And if they got there by a friend, they ask them to write down the friend's name. And that way the pastor can not only encourage the person who came, but also encourage the people who invited them. What did they think about the message? One of my planters came up with this idea of just having people reflect about the message that day and to get response from the message. Did they make a decision? You know, what type of decisions are you calling them to make throughout your service? Encourage them to have feedback. You need a spot on your communication cards where people can write notes, they can write questions, they can write prayer requests. Maybe have a place where they can indicate what they're interested in. And again, make it understandable to people. Don't use insider language and code words for those things. And then some people ask me, what's this A, B, C, D, E, F, G thing on the bottom? Well, a lot of our new churches are using this as almost a sign-up list. And so these would correspond, these letters would correspond with various announcements in your program. So if you had a membership class, let's say we're having a membership class, and you would say, well, circle the letter M if you want to sign up for that. Maybe it's a newcomers gathering. You know, circle the letter N and tell us how many people are going to be coming to that. But you have to have some way of developing a communication system in your church. And a lot of churches use these communication cards. But what I find is I talk to a lot of pastors and planters that they're frustrated with their communication cards. They're not getting people to fill them out, and that can be, you know, very, very challenging to them. And I think that you need to, if you're going to have people fill these out and respond, there's a couple things that you need to look at. One, you need to have a good name for the response card. I like the term communication card because that means it can be filled out by anybody. Number two, design this card as one tool that everybody can use, no matter how long they've been in the church. Number three, hand out pens, give pens out to people so they can write things down. And then number four, sometimes, on big Sundays, when you're doing big outreach events like Easter or your grand opening, sometimes you need to profile this card at least three times in the service by 3 different people. For example, it could be done at the welcome, where the worship leader welcomes everybody and says, hey, today there's a communication card, and sometimes throughout the service we want you to fill that out. It could be during the prayer time, where whoever's leading the prayer time can say, hey, if you have prayer requests, we want to encourage you that you can write those prayer requests in the back, and we have a prayer team that prays for those every day. And then maybe at the end of the service, at the end of the message, the pastor can call to a response and ask people to reflect about the message. But getting people's information is going to be critical to following them up, to getting them connected to the church, and you'll be amazed at how this can be used also for planting other churches. I'll never forget the day that I called a pastor who was about an hour away from me, and he said, you know what, we just had a couple come to our church that live in your community, and he gave me their information. I called them up, invited them to our church, went over to their house, met with them, and had the privilege of seeing the wife come to Christ and seeing the husband come back to Christ, and he became my first keyboardist in our new church that we were starting. So practice the response filter principle in your church. Then first impressions is another thing you got to take a close look at. Barna's research indicates that 70% of the people will make up their mind if they're coming back or not before the pastor even gets up to speak. And so there are several first impressions that you need to look at. And number one, and very critical, is the website. The website now has become the front door to your church. And you need to make sure you've got good information on that website. Make sure that your services are clearly identified. I'm amazed at so many times when I'll go and I'll be visiting a church and I'll go to their website and I can't find a phone number. I can't find what their service times are. And you just got to always review that, make sure that they make a good first impression, and that they're I don't think you have to go overboard on the glitz and the flash stuff, but you need to have a good functional website. Video is critical these days, putting the messages online. I was doing an interim pastorate at a new church last year, and I remember a couple came to me and they said, we've been listening to your sermons for about 3 months, and they finally came one Sunday. And it's amazing how many people will listen to your messages before they even enter the door. Number two, answering machine. A lot of new church planters use cell phones as the church phone. Make sure when that you give a message that doesn't say, hey, this is Pastor Joe, give me a call, leave a message. No, you have to remember that this cell phone is that's the numbers on the website. You need to answer it as if it was somebody who's searching, who's seeking, who's looking for answers, looking for directions, and make sure you refer to your website on your message. receptionist. A lot of church planners say, well, I can't afford a receptionist. Well, one of the things that we did is that we had a little church office, and we had volunteers come in and man our office for 4-hour shifts, and it was amazing how that worked in our little church startup 20 years ago. Today, what I would encourage pastors to do is, you know, if you had a number out there and people are calling it, I would encourage you to have a cell phone and give the cell phone to different people throughout the week of the church, and just have somebody live to answer the phone. Because, you know, when people are calling at church, typically they're calling out of a desperate need, and so that's important, that you have a good receptionist, somebody who's going to answer the phone in a spirit, in a humble spirit, in a way that's going to serve people. Signage, having good, not only external signage, making sure people can see how to enter the facility you're renting in, especially if you're renting a school. There are many doors to a school, and you want to have a good, clear entrance signs on schools, multiple signs. You can never outdo the signage. And then internal signage. You know, if you're in a large facility, rent a facility, have clear signs to where the children's ministry is, where the worship area is. Then greeters and ushers, there's nothing like having a warm smile and a friendly face welcoming you to the church. And the only thing you want to be aware of is just try to keep people who are close talkers away from being greeters. And you don't need any close talkers scaring people away. So greetings is science, and some people want to shake a hand, some people don't, and there's an intuitive sense to it. The other thing about ushers, one word about ushers, is we need to teach ushers how to ush, how to help people find a seat. Especially nowadays, everybody comes in late to church, and helping them try to find a seat is really critical. Publications, just having good, clear publications for your explaining who the church is. A good children's ministry publication would be really important, explaining next steps into the life of the church. Just make sure you have good, clear, crisp, professional-looking publications. Your program, your bulletin, whatever you want to call it, needs to be very clean and clear and attractive to make a good first impression. The atmosphere, you know, in rented facilities, you really got to work hard to make the atmosphere very positive, and then hospitality, some way you want to connect people, and depending on the size of your church, you want to provide some type of refreshments at the end where people can stay and connect with each other. All right. Let's talk a little bit about children's ministry. And two questions parents ask every child when they come out of Sunday school. You know, I've seen this for over 25 years, and they're always the same. What did you learn, and did you have fun? And so when kids come out of their children's ministry experience, they need to come out with, you know, having something in their hand that shows them that they learned something, and they need to come out, you know, just, you know, feeling very positive. The parents can see if they had fun just by the expression on their children's faces. And this is so critical. I mean, I can't tell you how many people came to faith in Christ in our church because, number one, they brought their kids. They said, you know what, I haven't been in church in 20 years, and I'm only coming here because I think my kids need it. And then what happens is their kids like it. What happens is usually they find out that they needed it also. And so having a positive experience with the kids is critical. Here's a couple of just practical insights on children's ministry. One, if you're going to have children in the service, speak to them. Speak to them. Somehow address the kids in the service. And then for older kids, junior high and older, if you help involve them in the service, in the production of the service at some level. The best musicians I had were junior high musicians because they were just coachable and teachable. Do what you can with excellence. And so what you need to figure out is what is the minimal we can do and do it with just excellence. So if you're going to provide child care for kids, for infants to second grade, you need to figure out how to break those groups up and how to do it well and with excellence. And I would strongly encourage you to do less better than to do more in a shoddy way. And then what you want to do is you want to build rotation teams. You want to have people who can come in and teach, teach and help on a rotation basis. One of the things that we had in our new church, and I've encouraged throughout our other churches that we've planted, is have a clear rotation of teachers and helpers. And for instance, we had 3 teachers and 3 helpers for each one of the classes that we offered. And so there'd be the teacher and helper would be on for 1 month, then they'd be off 2 months, then they'd be on 1 month. And especially when you only have one service, that is critical, because one of the things that happens is that if the teachers are not a part of the worship service, they'll burn out and they won't last. And you don't want good teachers to burn out. You want to keep them involved. And then next one was just go to 2 services as quickly as possible. That way you'll have more dedicated teachers. People will, we had people who said, no, this is my class. I will teach it. I'll be here every Sunday. And they just made a commitment to ministering to those kids. And then safety, safety, safety. Always, you need to think about safety, safety of the kids, the physical safety of the kids, just from an environmental aspect, and also, by doing background checks on teachers. It's just really critical these days. And then lastly, learn how to honor your teachers well. Learn how to lift them up and to honor them in front of the congregation. Well, here's a few reflection questions as you think about designing your worship service. How will you deal with the tension between the transcendent experience of the temple courts and the intimate fellowship in homes? I think when I look at the book of Acts, I see that they worshiped God, in the temple courts, and they also met in homes. And there's both experiences are valid and important, and you got to figure out how you're going to deal with that tension in the life of your church. How are you going to improve your response filter system? How are you going to improve getting names from people and getting addresses so you can follow up? Typically, there are 3 ways usually you get names. You get names from a response card or a guest registry, or you get names from if they write a check to the church. That's where you get their information. And another way is you get it through having them sign their kids up in the children's ministry. And so there's 3 ways to get names. so you can follow up with people. And then what could you do this week to improve the first impression of your public worship service? What would be one thing you could do this week that would improve the first impression? And then what would be one thing you could do this week to better serve the children in your community? So those are just a few items of reflection. And now I think we're ready for some Q&A.
Yeah, we've had quite a few questions come in here, Gary, and so we'll try to get through as many as we can. And perhaps it's best to start with the most recent material in terms of dealing with and developing a children's ministry. What would be one key activity or one primary focus that a team should have as they build a children's ministry?
Key activity or focus? Well, I think that you need to, part of the thing is picking a good curriculum, and that you're going to have to find that you're going to teach the kids. And there's a lot of great curriculums out there these days, but in new churches, because you're going to be training people how to do children's ministry, you're going to need to have good material that people that kind of the average person can use and can be trained in to simply teach the Bible to the kids. And so I think picking that curriculum is going to be really essential. One of the great things now today, there's all sorts of churches developing good curriculums, or there's video curriculum for different groups and sizes. So I would think that would be a critical piece.
Yeah, developing that turnkey approach of sorts. Mm-hmm. As obviously parents grow as their kids grow, and won't always you won't always have the same volunteers.
Right.
Part of that ministry.
Well, and then it's all on the job training, and
mm-hmm.
if you're going to be a church that's reaching people who are far from God, these are people who don't. I used to tell a lot of our converts that they should consider teaching Sunday school, because that way they're going to learn all the stories in the Bible. And I always told them you don't know it till you teach it.
Right. That's good. Well, with that, what have been some practical ways you and your community have either honored Sunday school teachers, or that you've heard of other churches and communities honoring their Sunday school teachers?
Yeah, I think public recognition of them, in the service. I think one of the things that our church does is that anybody, especially when you have one service, anybody who is part of the children's team gets a free CD or tape of the message. I think honoring them with good training, that it's taken seriously. One of the first hires that you're going to make in a church is a children's director, especially if you're reaching young families. And that main job of that children's director is to invest in the teachers, and to invest in them spiritually, relationally, to invest in them through good training them and encouraging them more and more. So,
yeah, that's good.
So one of the things we did is we had an annual kind of just a dinner for the teachers and all the people who worked. That was one way we did it, and we gave them a gift every year, and then just do the public recognition that
mm-hmm.
this is valuable. One of the good things that I liked about our church when I was pastoring was that we had a number of men teaching some of the children's ministry, and just lifting that value up and just recognizing those men for doing it really helped reinforce it, and we had more and more men show up to say this, to be part of the teaching team.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Shifting gears just a little bit, what ideas have you come across where churches have served the children of the community that may or may not even participate in the life of the church?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are, just a variety of things that could be done. Our church got actively involved in it was a kind of a children's fest in our city that was put on by the local city, and so we became engaged in that. It was an annual event. I think just providing recreational, family-friendly events, in your community is the way to do it. It all depends where you're at. If you're in an urban center, there's a variety of ways. There's after-school programs, mentoring. Could go on and on.
Yeah. Picking up on that, what differences exist, or what differences have you observed between designing services for suburban contexts and designing services for more urban contexts?
Well, the whole multicultural dynamic is, in an urban context. I mean, we have church that probably has close to 100 languages spoken, and it's just within blocks of the church, and so I think you got to bring in those various cultural aspects to the service. I think and one of the things I encourage our church plants to do, especially if they're in a multicultural setting, is make sure you're getting the various cultures who are on your worship team, on the stage, or on the platform. I think it's very, very important. So, so I think the biggest tension is just the multicultural diversity of the community in an urban context.
Yeah. Perhaps this question depends on the context as well, but in your opinion, is there one day of the week that's better than another to have services, particularly those that are primarily focused on the unchurched?
I still think, Sunday morning is the prime spot to reach unchurched people. The Saturday night, in my experience, I think Saturday nights are waning, and they're actually being replaced more with Sunday evening services. But I think that kind of that between 10:30 and 12 spot is probably the largest attended time spot, and probably more unchurched people would go there. I think as your church grows, you need to have more opportunities for people. But I think we're still in a culture that says Sunday morning is probably the primary time that unchurched people are going to come.
Yeah, I found that to be true. No matter the context, both urban and suburban and rural contexts.
Right.
And Sunday is still kind of the one day that most people set aside in their mind as being church day.
Like a number of my, back, 10 years ago, a number of my planters were doing Saturday night services, but they weren't seeing a lot of unchurched people coming. They were basically moving the church people out of their Sunday morning experience to Saturday night to make room for more unchurched people on Sunday morning.
Nice. So I know that's one thing. If you ever attend Saddleback, that's one thing Rick Warren often tells people
Yeah.
Because of that, this very thing that most visitors will come on a Sunday morning.
Right.
So he tells his members, hey, come to a Saturday night or a Sunday night service to make room.
I've just seen the real shift between there's more things going on Sunday night than Saturday. I think Saturday there's really, everything competes with Saturdays.
Indeed. Well, with that, what are some signs that a church is ready to transition from one service to either two services or even more services?
Yeah, there's the rule, it used to be the 80% rule. Now they're saying it's the 70% rule. So if your service is 70% full or more, you need to really start considering moving to a second service. And again, also, I think the other part is just your visitor flow. Are you getting visitors in on a regular basis? Are you keeping track of your visitors? And that's why it's important to have a response filter system. Is there a good flow of people, new people coming into your service every week? And but typically it's that 70% rule. If you've got a seating for 100 and you're running 70, 75, you need to start considering looking at that. So,
our bubble
or
of
moving to a larger facility. What's that?
Our personal spaces are expanding.
That's right.
We hear moving from 80 to 70%. Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. One other question. I want to be respectful of people's time here, and perhaps this is a good one to end on, but what is perhaps the biggest mistake that most planters make at this particular stage in their journey?
I think they get locked in to a certain style. And one of the things that I tell church planters over and over again is they get enamored with a certain style of worship or a certain model of church. And I think one of the things that God wants to do, and really into breaking our hearts, is kind of surrender that dream. And so I think it's holding that kind of that image that you have of what your church is going to look like, smell like, feel like, holding it lightly. And I learned this really, kind of the hard way. And I came out of in the mid '80s. I helped start a church in Chicago that was basically a Willow Creek clone. And this church went from kind of 40 people to 700 in a few years. And I figured I was going to move to Wisconsin and plant my church in a far west suburb of Wisconsin, of Milwaukee, and I was going to do the same thing and start a Willow Creek clone kind of deal. Well, I found out that it's a total different context, and it wasn't working. Church people didn't like what we were offering, and so what happened is I had to let go of that dream. And then design a service that worked in my cultural context, because we're talking a couple hundred miles away from each other. It's total different cultural context, and the church that I ended up planting and the service we ended up developing didn't look like the service I wanted to start with, and but it actually we had about 70% conversion growth because I was willing to surrender kind of my ideal, my image of what a successful church was, and really operate more like a missionary, and develop a service that reached our cultural context.
That's good. That's good.
And I see planters who they'll hold on to it. Like there was another church that started about the same time we did, and they just held on to that dream, and that church doesn't exist today. And are you seeing spiritual fruit, taking place? And are people coming to Christ, experiencing God through your services? If they're not, then you need to start tweaking and changing and being willing to let go of maybe some of your own pet peeves.
Well, Gary, what final words of encouragement can you leave with us?
Well, I would just say, number one, again, I said it earlier, be patient in designing your services, and always think of your cultural, the context of the culture. Try to solicit feedback from the people who are inviting people, and ask them, hey, what did your friend think of the service? Try to get that feedback from them. One of the things that we found very interesting is that we did a lot of standing in our services, and we found out that, hey, a lot of people didn't like standing that long. And so especially on big Sundays, when we were reaching out to the community, we tweaked our service a little bit, bending more towards people and their needs. So
that's good. That's good. Well, Gary, thanks so much for sharing your insights and your words of encouragement with us today. And we're excited for what you're going to share with us in the upcoming webinar as we wrap up this First Steps series that's been going on for several months now. Speaking of that, the next webinar is set for Thursday, February 18 at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. And so we will be sending out a registration link to that shortly in a post-webinar email. I also want to thank those of you who participated in today's webinar. Thank you for all of your questions and comments. We hope it was a beneficial experience for you, and we really do hope that this webinar will help you be more fruitful in your ministry. If you have any questions or comments about today's webinar, please submit them to me, your host, at John VB, that's Jon, V as in Victor, then B as in boy, at coachnet.org, and I'll be glad to respond to you that way. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, today's event is being recorded, and it will be available from the CoachNet website within 24 hours. And so wherever you are in your church planting journey, we hope that you'll continue to invite CoachNet along as together we seek to make more disciples and multiply ministry. And we look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Peace.